Good morning. Let's start today's current affairs discussion. So, to start with the topics, today topic start with the most controversial issue regarding the Delhi government's excise policy. Okay, recently this is in news because the CBI has filed case against the Delhi Excise Minister Manish Sisodia on this policy of the government. Okay, the policy, the New Delhi Excise Policy 2021-22. What is the topic? What is the news? New Delhi Excise Policy 2021-22, which was launched in November 2021. We sought to ensure optimum revenue for the state government, confront the sale of spurious or bottled liquor, and transform consumer experience, which ran into this 2 hours. Fine. So, ran into protest and widespread allegations of procedural lapses, and this has forced the government to scrap it with effect from 1st August 2022. Okay. In July, the Lieutenant Governor Vinay Saxena recommended CBI probe into the new policy. On the recommendation of the LG Lieutenant Governor, the CBI started the raid. Okay, on the premises of the Delhi government's Deputy Chief Minister Manish Sisodia, who holds the excise portfolio. His role is under the scanner for alleged be providing undue financial favor. For what? For providing undue financial favors to private liquor license, a charge denied by Aam Aadmi Party leaders. Fine. So the New Delhi government has come with a new excise policy 21-22. Okay, and so that policy aims to change the excise nomenclature in the state. Okay, but that policy ran into rough weather, and that led the government to scrap the policy, and the Lieutenant Governor of Delhi, Vinay Saxena, has recommended for a CBI probe into the issue, and the CBI, as per the recommendation of the governor, started action, and it has conducted raid in the different premises of the Deputy Chief Minister of Delhi, Manish Sisodia, who also holds the excise portfolio. So, what were some of these changes mooted in the new policy? The new excise policy marked the exit of state government from liquor retail in the city. It sought to provide more choice to alcohol consumer by offering more variety of brands, both popular and niche ones, through opening more liquor vendors. So the most important thing is that this policy has the provision of opening more liquor vending outlets to sell liquor in the capital region. Fine. It sought to provide better environment, especially for female citizens, while shopping for liquor through dedicated alcohol vents. Fine. So more dedicated alcohol vents will be open as per the provisions of the policy. So consumer will be able to easily get it without any hassle. In addition to reducing the number of dry days in Delhi from 20 to just 3 in a year, that means only for 3 days, so liquor will not be available in Delhi, which was earlier 20 days in a year, but it has been reduced to only 3. Only on 3 days there will be uh, ban on sale of liquor in a year, which was earlier 20 days. It sought to reduce the age of alcohol consumption in Delhi from 25 to 18. That means, so from 18 year onward, so people can legitimately consume liquor in Delhi. With the age was 25 years, that means anyone below that age was earlier not legally permitted to consume liquor in Delhi, but this age has been reduced to 18 from 25, but did not proceed with the step as it have required a legislative amendment. The new policy also sought to ensure equitable distribution of alcohol vents in the city by ensuring two liquor shops in each municipal ward to bridge the gap between observed and overserved and underserved areas. So there are some area where the number of liquor vents are more, and in some area liquor vents are not there. So to eliminate this discrepancy, the policy has a very clear provision that two liquor vents will be opened in each ward of Delhi. Under the new policy, the number of liquor vents in Delhi would increase from 630 to 850, all privately owned and operated. Okay, all these 850 liquor vents will be run privately without any government ownership over them. One person could hold more than one liquor retail license, and the heavily regulated excise regime under the previous policy are simplified for ease of doing business in overall trade. Another change in the policy was making wholesale license L1 independent of manufacturers. The revamped policy allowed independent entities to set up wholesale store and get franchisee from various manufacturers. This revamped policy was implemented on 17 November 2021 and remained forced till July 31st, 2022. Fine. So this policy, which was implemented in Delhi in November 17th from November 17th November 1921, so remain in force till 31st July 2022 before it was changed. Why and how did the revamp policy get mad in controversy? The revamp excise policy ran into controversy as soon as it was implemented with private liquor vents opening up across the capital. Because earlier, so these liquor shops were government run, but the new policy so completely privatized it. So many private liquor vents were open across the capital. And protests against the opening of liquor shops in their neighborhood are led by citizens in some area. The BJP and the Congress led a slew of protests against opening of liquor vents at locations near schools, religious places, and unauthorized areas. Not only the public, but even some political parties like the BJP and the Congress. They also raise the banner of protest because the liquor shops are open near the school area, near the religious places, and in some unauthorized areas. Okay, so that led to political parties joining the protest. Apart from the local citizen and the local committees who were against opening of the liquor shop in each nook and corner of the Delhi city. Okay, so many of these were sealed by the BJP-led Municipal Corporation of Delhi for various violations related to non-conforming areas where certain businesses such as liquor retail are not allowed under the provisions of the Master Plan of Delhi that govern urban planning and implementation in the city. So Delhi Municipal Corporation is led by the BJP. So the municipal corporation seized many liquor shops for non-conformity to the master plan of Delhi. Although the Delhi government has given the permission, the Delhi Municipal Corporation seized some of these liquor outlets. Fine. As many as 134 court cases, broadly about retail shops in unauthorized or non-conforming area, issues related to discounts and schemes such as 1+1, round of duty and payment of license fee are filed after the implementation of the policy. That means legal triangle started increasing once the policy was implemented. Only 468 of the 850 liquor vents would actually open, which led to many vendors surrendering their license, causing revenue losses for the government. So the license taken by the private parties, they are surrendered because they are unable to do business, coming under the restrictions of the Delhi Municipal Corporation. Although Delhi government has given the license for this, but the Delhi Municipal Corporation, because it started taking action against violation of the Delhi master plan rules. So many liquor outlets that the person who have taken the license have surrendered their license, and that was a big loss of revenue for the government. On the other hand, vendor increasingly exciting exist in the market effectively brought Delhi's record trade back to square one, making windfall gain for existing players in business and capitalization. Because many new players who entered, so they surrendered their license. So only the old and previous players who were there for years, so they made this business. Okay, because their capitalization was there, and there is price manipulation and other issues, and that was that grew uncontrolled in the capital territory. In July 2022, the Delhi Lieutenant Governor recommended a CBI probe to the new policy after receiving a report from the Chief Secretary, also said the Chief Minister Arvind Kejriwal, stating that policy was rife with alleged violation and deliberate and gross procedural lapses. What began as an assessment of departure from administrative procedure led to bringing Mr. Sisodia for the excise portfolio under the lens of alleged providing undue financial favor to liquor licensee. Okay, in this there is allegation that undue favor was provided to some liquor licensee by the minister, Minister Sisodia, for the deputy chief minister as well as the excise minister of the Delhi government. He has been booked for corruption by the CBI along with 15 others including liquor business owners and event media barons alleged involved in shaping the new policy and extending undue pecuniary advantage to public servants, bureaucrats and subordinate government officials. Okay. On July 31st, the LG received a proposal from Delhi cabinet to scrap the revamp policy and revert to the old policy for 6 months till the way forward could be figured out. So coming under the criticism, the Delhi government wrote to the Lieutenant Governor to scrap the policy and continue the old policy for 6 months till a revamp policy is again drafted. The new policy, according to the proposal, has not been able to achieve its desired objective of fetching greater revenue, and several issues in it has flagged and were under detailed examination and investigation by the CBI. Okay, so this is okay. So how much revenue Delhi earns from this excise? According to official figure, a little over 4,000 crore are generated in excise revenue in 1920. Between November 21 to July 2022, it earned approximately 5,400 crore, but the controversy led to a fall in sales revenue, with both retail and wholesale license abandoning their license, choosing not to renew them. The Delhi government admitted it has been suffering a loss over 193 crore on a monthly basis. And because many persons who have taken the license, they have surrendered because they are unable to carry on the business. Okay, this led to the controversy and the Lieutenant Governor ordered the CBI inquiry, and the CBI started raid on the premises of the Excise Minister Manish Sisodia, which made the topic controversial because the Aam Aadmi Party had put the allegation that the CBI is working under the direction of the central government to conduct the raid on the Aam Aadmi Party leader Manish Sisodia to harass him. Okay, so this allegation was done by the Aam Aadmi Party because its own leader Manish Sisodia was under the CBI scanner for this excise policy issue. And as CBI investigation started in his team, so the Aam Aadmi Party pointed finger towards the BJP led central government and the central agency, the CBI, for harassment of the Aam Aadmi Party and its functionaries, especially the Deputy Chief Minister and Excise Minister of Delhi, Manish Sisodia, because he came under the CBI scanner for his alleged role in this all these discrepancies in the new excise policy. Fine. So, although this is a state subject, but Delhi being the capital region, and the LG has more authority. Okay. So, the central government intervention has again brought the issue to the center stage. Fine. Fine. The next topic. Okay. So this topic is regarding the bank nationalization. You know, in India, banks started in the British era. So the British, when the British was ruling India, so the banking activity started in our country, and most of the banks were private banks. Fine. So the country became independent. In the post-independent period, government decided to nationalize the private banks. And in two different phases, the banks were nationalized. India completed 53 years of bank nationalization recently, amidst a policy debate over whether it is now time for a summary reversal of the momentous decision that Prime Minister Indira Gandhi took in July 1969. Is there a case of turning over all public sector banks to private sector overnights, or perhaps for an alternative that might involve privatizing some while keeping others in the public sector and stretching out the process of privatization that depends upon the policy goal inside? In this context, so let us know what is privatization. So why the government privatize the banks, so nationalize the banks in India, and what is the performance of these banks which are nationalized in the country's development? But the present challenge being faced by the banks which were nationalized earlier, and why there is a discussion to privatize again the nationalized banks. The banks which were nationalized once by the government are right now being privatized. Okay, and what is the rationale behind that? Fine. But the rationale behind privatizing the banks. Okay, so the context of the debate over the first decade, the public sector banks have struggled with high level of non-performing assets, which have eroded the bank's profitability and restricted their ability to finance India's growth needs. In dire cases, the government has to recapitalize public sector banks, triggering demands that instead of wasting taxpayers' money for recapitalization, the government should simply sell the bank off to private sector, Doing so would reduce the financial burden on the government while also ensuring that public sector banks become more efficient and profit making entities under private ownership. It has been argued, okay, by 2021, the government has reached a point that in Union Budget 21-22 it announced decision to start privatization by two public sector banks because the banks are going through a phase of instability and incurring heavy losses, rising NPA, especially the public sector banks. So there is a turn on the government's approach towards the public sector banks, and government is thinking to privatize them. Okay, so from their public sector status to allow them to be completely private banks, to be under private control and management, so they can be more profitable, and the burden on the government to recapitalize them and provide them budgetary support or any other recapitalization, capital for recapitalization, will not arise in future. So keeping that in view, government started the process, and the budget government announced that two public sector banks will be privatized this year. Total and rapid privatization. A recent research paper argued that all public sector banks should be privatized and the government should move as rapidly as politically feasible. However, if politically difficult for any Indian government to do so, it suggested a middle path of privatizing all public sector banks except the biggest, the State Bank of India. The research paper pointed to several metrics to argue that private sector banks are not only more efficient but also more profitable and far less susceptible to fraud. For instance, a chart below shows private banks have lower gross NPA. The research also found that between 2014 to 15 to 2021, uh, private sector banks contributed more towards extending loans and had a higher share of deposits from savers. In doing so, they added more branches and created new job, while the public sector banks saw decline on both counts. It has been also found that fraud amounts have concentrated disproportionately in the public sector banks. Unsurprisingly, therefore, there is a stark difference in the market capitalization of the public sector banks and the private sector banks. Fine. You see this graph, NPA in the private and public sector banks. So for the private sector, so it is comparatively low than the public sector banks. Okay, so profitability of the private sector banks is more than the public sector banks. Arguing is rapid privatization. In a paper titled Privatization of Public Sector Banks, an Alternative Perspective, member of RBI's Banking Research Division warned against viewing privatization as a panacea for all of the sector's ill. In support of their argument, RBI's research compared and contrasted the performance of public sector banks and private sector banks over different metrics. They looked at data since 2010, the time when the public sector banks have been at their weakest. The finding can be summarized as follows. Public sector banks are more socially relevant in India. The first justification why we should continue with the public sector banks. The point of nationalizing private banks in 1969 was to reach out to those sections of society and economy that are typically ignored by the private sector banks. Because during 1969, so what led the government to nationalize? Government nationalized because these then private sector banks were not fulfilling the financial requirement of the needy people or different sectors and sections of the society. They are confining to big business and industrial houses and to the urban areas. RBI research found that public sector banks are far ahead of the private banks in serving rural India. They have far more branches and ATMs rural India. Public sector bank also do the hefty lifting when it comes to financial inclusion and providing government services to the people. It is the public sector banks and not the private banks. Private sector banks account for just 1.3 crore of the almost 46 crore beneficiaries of the Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana. Just see, managing one account in the bank is expensive and many of these accounts are dormant. Still, the public sector banks are managing more than 44.7 crore account, out of which around 10-20% are non-functional. Okay, but the private sector banks are only opening all total 1.3 crore accounts out of the total 46 crore Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan accounts open under this particular program of financial inclusion. This manifests the seriousness of the participation of the private sector banks in any government financial inclusion program. Public banks are more cost efficient. When profit maximization is the sole motive, efficiency of the private banks has always surpassed that of the public sector counterparts. However, when the objective function is changed to include financial inclusion, like total branches, agricultural advances, priority sector lending advances, the public sector banks would be more efficient than the private banks. So, priority sector lending is a government program, and in this the public sector banks have more contribution than the private sector banks. Fine. Here, cost efficiency is defined as efficiency that gives a measure to how close a bank's cost is to what a best practice bank's cost could be for producing the same bundle of output under the same conditions. Fine. The public sector banks are more useful to the economy. The RBI research showed that public sector banks, far more than the private banks, extend loans when the economy is in a cyclical downturn. This is crucial because a downturn is when new loans are almost needed to put the economy back on the growth trajectory. Here come the private sector banks, public sector banks, not the private sector banks. They come in handy to the needy in case of any new program or projects of the government. Fine. This also कौन है इसका कोड़ा पड़े इच्छी कोड़ी हो जोड़ा पड़े तो छन्ना साथ मैडम बहुत देला मतलब जो बाड़ी सब तो कोड एड सब पड़ी होची कोड़ा पड़ी से फास्ट पेज ता पड़ी सब पेज ता पड़ी होची कोड़ा पड़ी जोड़ा पड़ी तो नहीं कर देबी हां अथे भाई असले भाई उतरे करियो आगे तो देइन हम तुम खुश कर के देबो. Okay, so this RBI's research showed that public sector banks, far more than the private banks, extend loan when the economy is in cyclical downturn. This also shows up in the choice of sectors that public sector banks lend to. Infrastructure, for instance, infrastructure finance has been a bottleneck in the country's development and growth. PSB have a lion's share in this lending, and their role has been especially crucial against the backdrop of withering away of history-wide developmental financial institutions. That is why the role of appreciate that the importance of the public sector banks. The study also found that public sector banks are more effective in monetary policy transmission to the people than the private sector banks. With the monetary policy, the government reduces some interest rate. The public sector banks, they immediately transfer that benefits to the customer, which is not done by the private sector banks. They try to capitalize or maximize their profit and don't transform that benefit to the beneficiary. When government, the monetary policy reduces some interest, etc., that was not transmitted to the consumer by the private bank, which was done honestly by the public sector banks. Right. Whereas the private banks never transfer those benefits which are for the consumer to the real consumer. Fine. They try to capitalize on that and get the financial benefit for themselves. During the last easing cycle, for example, PSP reduction in lending rates was substantially higher than that of the private banks. At the same time, the public sector bank deposit rates were relatively steeper than the private banks. While this reduces the income of public sector banks, which is the private sector banks, the research argued that this showed that the public sector banks contribute to a larger social goal than the private banks. In line with recent research, which suggests that private ownership alone does not automatically generate economic gain in developing economy, and a more cautious and nuanced evaluation of privatization is required. So, privatization should not be taken in very populist measure, but yes, its real assessment is to be done so Before privatizing the public sector banks, all pros and cons can be discussed in detail, and accordingly steps can be taken with the privatization is the real requirement of the economy, privatization of the public sector banks are the real requirements, or in a hasty manner to just relieve the government from the burden of giving budgetary support or capital recapitalization amount to the public sector banks. The government want to get rid of its responsibility. Okay, because in a country like India, the social sector responsibility is more taken by the public sector banks than the private sector banks. Okay, so the customers, especially the customers in the vulnerable section, their access to the public sector banks are more than their access to the private sector banks. Okay, the private sectors have very rarely ventured to rural areas. They very rarely cater to the need of the rural people. Small amount, even in opening an account, so the amount that is required to be maintained in the account is much higher in the private sector banks than in the public sector banks. So this is easier for the common people, especially the vulnerable section in Indian society, to approach a public sector bank and carry on to fulfill his financial requirement from a public sector bank than from a private sector bank. This needs to be taken into consideration before any decision is taken to completely privatize all the public sector banks in the country. Fine. Rather, better management practices and better efficiency measures can be better panacea than mere privatization. Then the next topic that we take is also into banking about the central bank digital currency. Reserve Bank of India Digital Rupee, the central bank digital currency, may be introduced in phases beginning with wholesale business in the current financial year. In her budget speech in 1st February, Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman has said that the central bank would launch the CBDC, central bank digital currency, in the financial year 22-23. The RBI, which has reportedly voiced its opposition to private digital currency, has proposed to the government in October 2021 year to widen the scope of the paper rupee to include currency in digital form. As per the RBI recommendation, the central government has decided to launch the central bank digital currency. What is the central bank digital currency? According to RBI, CBDC is a legal tender issued by a central bank in a digital form. It is the same as a fiat currency and is exchangeable one to one with the fiat currency. Only its form is different. The digital fiat currency and the CBDC can be transacted using wallets backed by blockchain. Okay, it is not physically available, but it will be same as the physical fiat currency, but it will be digitally available. Okay, though the concept of CBDC was directly inspired by Bitcoin, the virtual currency, it is different from decentralized virtual currencies and crypto assets, which are not issued by the state and lack the legal tender status. The CBDCs enable the user to conduct both domestic and cross-border transactions which do not require a third party or a bank. Fine. So this is not same as the virtual currency like the Bitcoin, but they are more convenient for transaction because they overcome the barrier of physical transactions. Fine. How the CBDC help? According to Ministry of Finance, introduction of CBDC has the potential to provide significant benefits such as reduced dependency on cash, higher single or age due to lower transaction cost, reduced settlement risk. Introduction of CBDC would also possibly lead to more robust, efficient, trusted, regulated, and legal tender-based payment option. Fine. Advantages. RBI has proposed amendment to the Reserve Bank of India Act 1934 which would enable it to launch the CBDC. The government had been planning at the time of introduction of a bill in Parliament that would prohibit all private cryptocurrency in India with certain exceptions. Government has received a proposal from RBI in October 2021 for amendment to the RBI Act of 1934 to enhance the scope of the definition of banknote to include currency in digital form. Fine. Because the original RBI rules of 1934, okay, it defines paper currency in a different way. Digital currency were not added in the currency basket. RBI has been examining huge cases and working out a phased implementation strategy for introduction of the CBDC with little or no disruption. RBI has repeatedly flagged concern over money laundering, terror financing, tax evasion, etc. with private cryptocurrency like Bitcoin, Ether, etc. Introducing its own CBDC has been seen as a way to bridge the advantages and risk of digital currency. What will the introduction of digital rupee change for citizens? There are several models proposed by the technology experts and evangelists on how the digital rupee would be transacted, and the formal announcement of the RBI will likely to provide the details. One chief difference would be that a digital rupee transaction would be instantaneous as opposed to the current digital payment experience, because digital currency would be maintained in digital wallet, so no need to look at the ledger for transferring the amount in case it is digitally done, the digital banking activity done now, because the currency from the digital wallet will be transferred in this digital asset, so it will be faster, reliable, and convenient than the present practices of digital banking, through which the physical assets like currency transfer from the ledger of the account holders. So if that is kept in his the digital wallet, so it will be much convenient to transact it. Fine, that's the advantage. Fine, and there is another topic on the a famous person, Pandurang uh, Khankoji, the Lok Sabha Speaker Om Birla, who is currently in Canada for the 60th Commonwealth Parliamentary Conference, will travel to Mexico, where he will unveil the statue of Swami Vivekananda, and Maharashtra born freedom fighter and agriculturist Panduranga Khankoji. Okay, Khankoji had a close connection to Mexico, the country in which he sought refuge due to his association with the radical pro-Indian party in the independence struggle for the Gaddar party. The speaker's visit is part of the government's effort to honor lesser known Indian origin leaders outside India. Fine. Who is this gentleman, Panduranga Kankoji? Born in Wardha, Maharashtra in the late 19th century, Panduranga Kankoji came in contact with other revolutionary uh, leaders. His daughter Savitri Sharne, who wrote his biography, wrote in his early years, as a student, Kankoji was an ardent admirer of French Revolution and the American War of Independence. Close to home, the Hindu reformer Swami Dayanand Saraswati and Arya Samajist movement, which called for a spirit of reforms and social change, became the hero of a young student group led by Kankoji. Kankoji decided to go abroad for further training in revolutionary methods and militaristic strategy. At this time, the British government, suspicious of him, were also growing due to his anti-government activities. Before leaving, he visited Bal Gangadhar Tilak, by whom he was inspired. Tilak advised him to go to Japan, which was itself a strong anti-West Asia imperialistic force then. After spending some time with the nationalists from Japan and China, Kankoji eventually moved to the US, where he enrolled in a college as a student of agriculture. But a year later, he joined the Mount Temple Military Academy in California to fulfill his original purpose of leaving India for the revolutionary struggle. Kankoji was one of the founding members of the Gaddar Party, established by Indians living abroad in 1914, mostly belonging to Punjab. Its aim was to lead a revolutionary fight against the British in India. While in the USA, Kankoji met Lala Hardayal, the founder of the Gaddar Party, an Indian intellectual teaching at Stanford University. Hardayal had begun a propaganda campaign publishing a newspaper that featured patriotic songs and articles in the vernacular language of India. This is the seed from which the Gaddar Party has emerged. Why did Kankoji reach Mexico? At the military academy, Kankoji met many people from Mexico. The Mexican Revolution of 1910 had led to a overthrow of the dictatorial regime, and this inspired Kankoji. He also reached out to Indian working in farm in US with the aim of discussing the idea of Indian independence with them. There he met Mexican workers as well. Along with the Indian workers, military action was planned by Kankoji in India, but the outbreak of the First World War halted these plans. He then reached out to Bekaji Kama in Paris and met with the Vladimir Lenin in Russia, among other leaders, seeking support for the Indian cause. So passionate he was. Okay. However, as he was facing possible deportation from Europe and could go to India, he sought shelter in Mexico. Soon, in part due to his prior friendship with Mexican revolutionary, he was appointed a professor at the National School of Agriculture in Chapingo near Mexico City. He researched corn wheat pulses and rubber, developing a frost and drought resistant varieties, and was part of the approach to bring a green revolution in Mexico. Later on, the American agronomist Norman Borlaug, called the father of green revolution in India, brought the Mexican wheat variety to Punjab, because in the Green Revolution, we brought the wheat from Mexico and the rice from Philippines. Kankoji was revered as an agricultural scientist in Mexico. The renowned Mexican artist Diego Rivera painted murals that feature Kankoji, including title Our Daily Bread, that prominently depicted him breaking bread with people seated around a table. Fine. So his contribution to the agricultural revolution in Mexico was prominent. He was recognized for that, and so the government of India, after much, after 75 years of independence, has decided to honor him by unveiling a statue by the Speaker of Lok Sabha. Okay. Then the next news is improving rice yield with additional gene. Adding a second copy of one of its own gene has boosted the yield of Chinese rice variety up to 40%. Research say. But this is negative effect of Green Revolution. The Green Revolution of the 1960 brought about a marked improvement in the yield of agricultural crops such as rice and wheat. It was based on the use of newly developed high-yielding crop variety in conjunction with the intense use of irrigation, chemical fertilizers and pesticides. So Green Revolution launched in the 1960s in India was adopted the process of that high yielding variety of seed, irrigation, chemical fertilizer, and pesticides. India saw a threefold increase in rice yield per hectare. 50 years later, some negative effect of this intense methodology are becoming apparent. Nitrogen fertilizer and agrochemical pose environmental hazard because more and more nitrogenous fertilizers is used in paddy field. Water is often in short supply because huge quantity of water is required. Then agricultural soil is increasingly fatigue. Okay, to obtain more food for the world's growing population, forest and grassland will have to be converted to farm in order to produce food. This in turn would enormously strain our ecosystem. So right now we are thinking how to go for producing more crop from the same amount of land available, and here research shows something new, a 40% yield increase. A possible way out of this conundrum has been suggested in a recent publication. These reports point out that giving a Chinese rice variety a second copy of one of its own gene have boosted its yield of by 40%. When a second copy of a single gene called the OSDRB1C is added to rice, it improves photosynthesis and nitrogen use, speeding up flowering, absorbing nitrogen more efficiently, offering larger and more abundant grains. Okay, that means the second gene is added, so without much changes in the from foreign gene, so the yield increases by 40%, which is a big development. Okay, so India is the world's largest exporter of rice. It exported 18.75 million metric tons to over 150 countries during the 21-22 period, thereby earning $6.11 billion. Vietnam turns out the second most produced of rice and it produced 6.5 million tons in 21-22. It has to be much more than 18.75 million tons for India to continue and expand its role as the world's largest producer and exporter of rice. So, and in this process, this new technology will be of help to India. So, gene modulation, a key point is that the researchers have added the same gene again and not any foreign one. This is best described as a genetic modulation. It is not a genetic modification, and neither is the result of a transgenic plant carrying element from another donor. This is particularly relevant to India, which must aim to continue its world position in the production of rice and marketing. India has some excellent rice research located in Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka, Punjab, Haryana, and genetic engineering in several laboratories across the country. Minister of Agriculture can come together the Department of Biotechnology and nutritionists from Indian Council of Medical Research can support these researchers to augment India's role as a major rice exporter in the world with nutrients added to rice. Okay, because right now government has a big missionary plan of food fortification, and more nutrients, minerals, etc. can be added to rice, like the golden rice. Okay, with vitamin A. So similar things can be done in from other segments in rice, and that will be much beneficial to the hungry millions in India. Okay, so food fortification planning of the government needs technical or genetic changes so to successfully implement it. Okay, then we have a long question regarding the Central Information Commission. It's the highest appellate body under the RTI Act. However, it has its own limitation. In this context, discuss the power and function of the Central Information Commission. The Central Information Commission is a statutory body which was established by the central government in 2005 through the official gazette notification under the provisions of the Right to Information Act 2005. The CIC is a high power independent body which interrogates look into the complaint made to it and decides the appeals. It is the appellate authority and power of a court. It entertains complaint and appeals pertaining to offices, financial institutions, public sector undertakings, etc. under the central government and the union territories. The Commission acts as the highest appellate body under the RTI Act and has the following power and functions. It is the duty of the Commission to receive and inquire into a complaint from any person who has not been able to submit an information request because of non-appointment of public information official, or refuse information that was requested, who has not received a response to this information request, or who think the fee charged are unreasonable, or information given is incomplete, misleading, or false, and any other matter relating to obtaining information. The Commission can order inquiry into any matter if there are reasonable grounds for it. So moto power. For inquiring, the Commission has the power of a civil court in respect of such matter, like summoning and enforcing the attendance of persons and compelling them to give oral or written evidence, or both, or and for oath on produced documents or things, etc. During the inquiry of a complaint, all public records must be given to the Commission. Commission has a power court. The Commission also has the power to secure compliance of its decision from the public authority. It includes directing public authority to appoint a public information officer where none exist, enhancing training provisions for officials on the right to information, seeking an annual report from the public authority on compliance with its act, imposing penalty under the RTI Act. See the wider domain of the CIC. The CIC, or Central Information Commission, was created as per the RTI Act 2005 with powers, and there is State Information Commission. Okay, but the Central Information Commission acts as an appellate authority and power of a civil court. The The Commission also has the power to secure compliance of a decision from the public authority. This includes directing the public authority to appoint a public information officer or PIO where none exist, existing training provisions for officials on right information, seeking an annual report from the public authority to compliance with its act, imposing penalty on the RT Act, etc. When a public authority does not conform to the provisions of the RT Act, the Commission may recommend steps which ought to be taken for promoting such conformity. However, CIC suffered from certain limitations such as central government controlling its terms of office, salaries and allowances under the terms and conditions of service, non-compliance of CIC order, no centralized database of RT applicants at the central and state level, personnel and infrastructural constraints, high dependency of cases, etc. The Central Information Commission suffers from the following limitations, such as central government controlling its terms of office, salary and allowances and other terms and conditions of the service. So it is not fully free to perform its duty. Okay. Non-compliance of CIC order. The order given by the CIC at times have not been complied by different government departments. Non-compliance affects its image. Okay, so this is another limitation. Non-centralized database of RT applications at the central and state level. There is no centralized database of the applications received by the Right Information Act at the central and the state. Personnel and infrastructure constraints. Okay, so its own manpower and infrastructure is much backward or not up to the requirement. So this puts pressure on it. Fine. Then high dependency of cases. So there is high dependency of the cases under the RTI, so which make it like deformed, because when the cases are large number of cases are pending, so it has very less relevance. Okay, any change as brought through RT Amendment Bill 2019 should not defeat the very purpose of installing this autonomous body that judges the correctness of central governmental action in denying access to information. So if we have made it through parliamentary act, we must ensure that it's function properly, because this is the power of the public. Through this information, right to information, the general public is made or is made eligible to access any information from the government. Okay, and many lapses have been exposed through the RTI findings. Okay, government lapses, lapses of government agencies, unlawful expenditures, delaying the work. Okay, so all numerous cases have been reported when the RTI is completely implemented, and we need to make it more proactive. So the benefit of this act is definitely in a more holistic manner. Fine. Then let's go to the MCQs of today. Okay. So with reference to central bank digital currency (CBDC), consider the following statement. It is simply the digital form of the country's fiat currency. Yes, in this year's budget, the finance minister declared to launch that the RBA will launch the central bank digital currency (CBDC). It is the legal tender issued by the central bank in a digital form. So, right, it is digital or virtual currency, but is not comparable to the private virtual currency because it is issued by the central bank under the government permission. It is a sovereign currency in an electronic form, and it would appear as a liability on a central bank's balance sheet. Definitely. So because government will issue it, circulate it, regulate it, so all these four criteria will be fulfilled by the central bank digital currency. With reference to rice production in India, consider the following statement. In terms of nutritional content, rice is poor in nitrogenous substance. Okay, because more and more nitrogen fertilizer is to be applied for rice cultivation. India is the largest rice producer. It is China which is the largest producer. Then coming to wet rice cultivation technique, an example of which बहुत traditional agro system in related to which of the following tribes, it is the Apatani tribe. So which is the traditional rice cultivator. Recently, Lok Sabha Speaker Om Birla hold discussion with the Indian political president Chandrika Prasad Santokhi. He is the president of Suriname. Fine. Chandrika Prasad Santokhi. Okay. Which refers to India, consider the following: nationalization of banks, formation of RRB 75, adoption of village by the bank branches. Okay. So, steps taken in the financial inclusion in India. All the three were steps in financial inclusion because banks were spread to rural areas and banks try to cover as much people as possible. Then greenfield privatization or incremental privatization denotes encouragement to private sector in area as a future for the public enterprises, right? Cold privatization refers to measures taken to distance public enterprises from the government. So both are correct. Which of the following organizations associated with the Farmers Distress Index, the NABARD, National Bank for Agriculture and Rural Development, which is associated with the publication of the Farmers Distress Index in India. Consider the following statement with respect to minimum support price. MSP is computed on the basis of the recommendation made by the Commission for Agricultural Cost and Prices (CACP) under the Ministry of Agriculture. Currently, tea is covered under the MSP. No, tea is not covered. It is a beverages. The beverages are not covered. MSP for food grains is always kept necessarily higher than the market price of the grains. No, it is not higher than the market price. So only one is correct and two and three are incorrect. National Mineral Exploration Trust established under the Ministry of Mines. Okay. Ranganathattu Bird Sanctuary, which recently reopened for tourists, is in Karnataka. And India secured who's the following rank in the medantally at the 15th International Olympiad in Astronomy and Astrophysics. India is third position. Recently, ADB and the Government of India signed a 96.3 million loan agreement to provide safe drinking water and improve water supply and sanitation service in Himachal Pradesh. Then, which of the following scheme program of Government of India aims to promote participation of women in science and technology? The Gati scheme, the Curie initiative, and the Kiran scheme. All the three are women-specific program for science and technology, promoting science and technology, women entrepreneur, women-led science and technology promotion. The following is not including the asset of commercial banks. Assets, deposits and liability, not assets, because on deposit bank has to pay higher than what it will receive at deposits. So deposit are the liability of the banks, not the assets. All the advances, investment and call money are the assets of the bank because from these bank earn. But on deposit bank has to pay, so deposit is not an asset of the bank. Internal Day is celebrated 23rd August. Then Tonga volcano often mentioned in news due to eruption recently with reference to this comes the following statement. It is part of Tonga Kermadec Island volcanic arc, a subduction zone extending from New Zealand northeast to Fiji. It is formed at the divergent boundary where the Pacific plate subducts under the Indo-Australian plate. It is wrong. Only one is correct. The term genetic modulation has been recently seen in news refers to process of temporarily altering gene expression level without making heritable changes to the underlying cellular DNA, which was considered for changing in the uh, rice technology. Calpamine recently is leprosy. Okay, related to leprosy. Okay, then Lisbon Declaration to ocean conservation. And the last question: which of the following is not a member of Quad? Quad consists of Australia, USA, India, and Japan. Okay, so in place of South Korea. So the right name is Japan. So this is incorrect because South Korea is not a member of what, which is has four members: USA, Australia, India, and Japan. This is called an alliance of democracy. Okay, and this is a group created to checkmate Chinese hegemony. Fine. This is all about today. So thank you for observing. So keep on watching regularly. So to update yourself on all the developments on a daily basis to get engaged. Thank you all.